Hi everyone, my name is Kirsten Kraas. I'm a research advisor for Wiz Academy and facilitator of the research capacity building workshops. Welcome to the Wiz Academy YouTube channel where we empower researchers with tools to excel in their research. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the 4 phases of writing. In a previous video on how to kickstart topic discovery, I briefly introduced 4 phases of academic writing. Now in this video, I just want to elaborate a bit on those and just basically explain how the 4 phases of writing can be integrated and how it can be useful in different stages of producing scientific documents like a thesis or an academic paper. Now, as I said, there are 4 phases of writing. And if one understands those 4, phases of writing, it really kind of helps you to focus your efforts. And because sometimes, during the process of topic discovery, like I explained in this video on how to kickstart topic discovery, there's actually a phase, where you need to generate ideas. Now, when you generate ideas, you can't really craft an argument because you're still trying to internalize the readings and the things that you come across. Now, if you understand the 4 phases, it's then easier for you in your mind and in your writing and also in your conversations with your supervisor, of your thesis to kind of explain where you are in the process. Now, the 4 phases of writing are firstly generative writing, then drafting, then editing, and then finally scientific peer review. Now in the generative writing phase, it's really a phase where you are brainstorming ideas. It's where writing is really a form of thinking. Now it's a very important principle to know, and what I explained also in the previous video is that if you outsource your thinking, let's say to an AI tool or to somebody else, it's very difficult to claim that you've really internalized those ideas or that you've really brainstormed those ideas, using your brain. And so the important principle here is if writing is a form of thinking, you don't know what you think until you haven't written it down or until you haven't read it. So writing, during the process of generating ideas really is a very important process. Now during generative writing, it's a phase where you discover meaning. It's a phase where you write for yourself. It's a type of informal writing in many forms. And it's often very messy. I mean, if you look at the sort of documents that I created during my generative writing phase, it's really messy. It's full of spelling mistakes. Things are all over. There's no consistency. There's no editing. There's no even drafting. There's no, coherent argument in the process. And it's often the type of writing that you won't give to your peer reviewers and you won't give to your supervisor. The drafting phase is really where all those different ideas or the different arguments that you get in the papers that you read or that you generate through engaging with the research, the journals that you're reading. The drafting phase is where you start putting all of those together in an imaginary conversation. So for example, let's say you are generating your understanding or reflections on, problem issues in your field or specific topics or a particular theory during the generative phase. Those ideas can now be put together in an argument. So in your argument, you will say, the general idea of the following 3 authors are that is that, and then you state your claim, you state your problem or whatever it is you want to do. But that then becomes an imaginary conversation between you and the papers that you are reading. So during the drafting phase, you are focused on writing for somebody else. Could be your examiner, could be your supervisor, definitely your peer reviewers and the future readership of your article. It's in that phase where you are concerned for making sense or arguing a point for somebody else. It's really an imaginary conversation, and it often involves writing and rewriting and, for example, getting different paragraphs to flow as well, getting different sections to flow, And for example, building on using the inverted pyramid style of writing, which is also a video that I introduced a while back. So drafting is really where there's a need for constructing a conversation or constructing an argument. During the generative writing phase, you're not busy with constructing arguments, you're busy with thinking, okay? And that's why it's messy. I found that a useful tool during the generative phase of writing would be to just split create a table. It can be in a spreadsheet or in a Word document, and you just have like 3 columns where you say, this is my reference, first column, second column, you say, these are some interesting quotes that I feel could be useful later on when it comes to the drafting phase. And then in the final column, I just write my reflections, my thinking about what I'm reading. That's really what it is, the generative phase. But then when it comes to the drafting, all of those ideas which you have, in your table, each row would be like a separate reference. Each of those ideas are then kind of synthesized or put together, collated together to start becoming an argument. And so the drafting phase is you then go back to your, your table that you created or your spreadsheet or wherever you do your generative writing, and you start crafting that into an argument. It's only in the third phase, which is the editing phase, where you start focusing on presenting your work in such a way that it's appropriate for the genre, for the community, for the paper, or for the thesis that you're busy with. And so in that phase, you are concerned for spelling, there's the grammar, vocabulary, layout. You're going to focus on things like first person writing consistently. Is it going to be present tense, past tense, those sorts of consistencies. You are then focused on, in the editing phase, focus on a concern for the expectations of the genre and the community. The discipline will have a particular style, or let's say you're in engineering, there's a particular style of writing, that the community have, accepted, and you need to kind of fit with that. There might be a particular style relevant to the conference that you're submitting your paper to. And in the editing phase, you start looking at that. But there's no point in, starting to prepare your document for presentation if you haven't got your drafting right. In other words, your conversations or your arguments are not in place, and you haven't generated ideas. It's also in the editing phase, but you'll see also that in that line, that arrow that runs across it, you during the editing phase need to make sure that there's adequate alignment between all aspects of your research, and that editing, that alignment you need to also start looking at during the drafting phase. So those are the 3 important phases during the writing process, but then there's a 4th phase, and that is where you start taking an argument to the community that you're writing for. Now, in the case of a thesis, as I said in prior videos, is you don't want your argument to only get out there to the community in the final phases of your thesis. You actually want to start testing your argument, preliminary arguments or preliminary sort of findings. You want to test that in the community, and so therefore it's so useful during writing of a thesis to go to a conference, let's say after you've done your review of literature or after you've got some preliminary findings, and go and test the arguments, at a conference or in a journal. But the scientific peer review phase is where you actually then present your arguments and you get feedback from the community. And sometimes you get a reject, when you submit a paper, and that's actually a good thing also, because the reject will often be followed with some explanation as to why your argument doesn't make sense, or gaps in your review of literature, or gaps in your approach to methodology, whatever it may be. And that feedback you can then bring back into your argument to strengthen it for the next submission. It could be a different journal, it could be a second submission for the same journal, or whatever it may be. So those 4 phases are really very important, and you need to separate those. So for example, if you're busy with reading articles and you're busy generating ideas, don't try and also craft an argument. Focus on just the reflections, get to know the papers, get to know the articles. When you're busy with drafting, then focus on, getting the conversations right, getting the arguments right. sometimes you find during the drafting phase, when you really want to build an argument, you want to make specific claims and you discover, but I don't have enough evidence yet. I still need to do some reading. And at that stage, you go back to your generative writing and say, you know what, I can't write this yet. I don't have enough reading. Let me go back and start reading again. Get more papers, internalize those papers through the generative writing phase. It's also then useful to, when you speak to your supervisor, if you're a student, to tell your supervisor, I'm busy with the generative writing phase, and so therefore don't look at my arguments. Or I'm busy with the drafting phase, please look at my arguments and the ideas that I bring into that, but please don't look at my presentation. It's going to be full of spelling mistakes. I want you to look at that. And then if you're a supervisor, also then guide your students, to say, ask your student, are you busy with the drafting? Are you still busy creating these ideas? Or should I look at your argument? And often in the early phases, you'll find there's a lot of generating of ideas, and therefore then focus on those ideas. If you see an argument developing in your student, your student's writing, then start giving feedback on that. If the student is getting ready to present and submit, then focus on the editing. But don't do, for example, editing feedback if you see your student is still busy with drafting. And don't do editing feedback if you're busy with generative writing. And the other thing that I've also seen is that often, students in their writing, especially let's say at honors and masters level, is they do the generative writing and they skip the drafting and they go into editing. And so often, when you look at the writing, you see, these different paragraphs are author driven. It's like you see the paragraph written like this. It says, according to so and so, and then there's a paraphrasing of a particular author. And the next paragraph would be a different author. That for me typically is a sign that the student looked at the generative, or was still busy with the generative writing phase, and took those ideas, crafted paragraphs, and stuck those paragraphs together, calling it a lit review. What you should do is you should actually not do author-driven writing, you should have claims-driven writing. Because claims-driven writing says that I'm busy with an argument. So based on that, I wish you all the best with drafting, with editing, with bringing feedback from your peer reviewers or your supervisor back into your own development of your writing, and never stop thinking. Always keep reading and reflecting. And also remember, and this is maybe my final point for this video, is that sometimes you need to stop reading to start writing. I've found some students that almost like scared to leave the reading and start writing. It's like they lack confidence. Sometimes you just need to jump. So from my side, happy writing, and I look forward to see you in the next video.